What's up, Inspired Vision students, plus anybody I might be catching on YouTube? We are now on day 8 of our 18-lesson course for Accelerated Algebra 1. Alright, so today we are learning a new concept called direct variation, and then we're going to review all of the days 5 through 8. So, as always, it is time to learn some math. Now here's how today's going to work. We are one concept coming from reporting category 3, TEKS A.2, and we're going to do a star release question to introduce us to that concept. Then I'm going to do a 12-question guided practice review, because the way that this worked in my class was we had a quiz on day 8. So it was a 12-question quiz. How I'm going to do it on the video is I'm going to show you each question. So you need to pause at each question, and then I'm going to cover all the answers quickly so the video doesn't go too long. So if you would like a little bit slower review, because today I have to cover the answers pretty quickly, then check out my other lessons. So subscribe so you can get all the lessons, the 18-day lesson to prepare for the course. All right, so here's our concept for today. If you read the question, you can already see that the language is a little bit different. The key words in this problem is varies directly. Varies directly is a formula that you'll get on the formula chart at the beginning of STAAR, which is y equals kx. If you notice, y equals kx is very similar to y equals mx plus b, which is our slope-intercept form. These two equations are directly related. The only difference is y equals kx. They're just using a different letter to stand for the constant of variation, which is the same thing for slope, but there's no plus or minus number after. But in this problem, they give us y and x. So using y equals kx, if you rearrange the order and plug in 20 over 3 for y and 30 for x, we're going to solve for k. That is the key to this question. We're going to solve for k. Now, this fraction might be scaring you. If you want, you can clear your fraction and you'll get your answer, or you can just treat it like a number, since we only need to do one thing in this problem. That one thing is to divide by 30. So in your calculator, if you type in 20 divided by 3, then divided by 30, you'll get your answer. You could do it with or without parentheses. Either way, you should be getting 0.2 repeating. Now 0.2 repeating, we're going to want to turn that into a fraction. So now we have the value of k. To put it into our equation, we replace k with 2 over 9, or 2/9, and now that is our answer. Okay, so that was the STAAR question talking about direct variation. We're going to take this concept a little bit further, but not until we do 10 questions of review. So that's what's going to happen next. I'm showing you 10 questions of review. Again, I have to go through this a little fast just so my video link doesn't go too long. So make sure you're pausing if you need to copy down the material. So for question number 1, the trick to this one is, on my graph, or I'm given 3 columns of data, but if I look at my graph, I only want to use my x and my y axis. So that means only use temperature and number of skiers into my L1, L2. You never want to type in 3 columns of data. That will never work for linear regression. So if you type all this into L1, L2 like this, and do stat calc 4 like this, you're going to get a crazy equation. So the next thing you want to focus on is only go 2 decimal places if you see a crazy equation like this. And if you only go 2 decimal places and round, then I'm going to pick out negative 3.24x and then 467.38, and that'll work just fine for my equation. Now, if you're typing this in the calculator and you don't see r, that's because I have my diagnostic on for my correlation coefficient, and that's not important to this question. The only time that this is important is when they're asking for linear correlation, or we have to do an equation where we need that, but this isn't it. Okay, so that's it. The way that my quiz will be is I'm going to either ask you for an equation, so I would want you to stop here if I'm asking you for an equation, because it does say determine the equation, or I'm going to ask you to make a prediction. So since I don't need a prediction in this problem, I'm going to move on. Number 2, they love this question on stars. So the first thing I need to do is figure out the equation to this. So I can either use rise over run and my y-intercept of 8, or I can type this into stat and do stat calc 4. Either way, my equation should be 2x plus 8. And I want to write that down because none of my answer choices have 2x plus 8. So that means I need to go through each answer choice, set up my rectangle triangle. Again, I talked on rectangle triangle more on day 3 and a lesson on day 5. But set up my rectangle triangle, subtract 2x on both sides, and then divide by 1. Another key thing here is when you subtract 2x on both sides of the equation, you need to put it side by side with what's already on the right-hand side because they're not like terms. And when I finish dividing by 1, I have an equation. Now this is not a match, so we need to do the same thing for B. Subtract 1x on both sides, divide by -2 because we're putting that side by side, and then when we divide by -2, we're going to get a positive 1/2 x or positive 0.5 x. Okay, still not a match, so I'll go do it to C. Subtract 1x on both sides, put these side by side because they're not like terms, divide by 2. And this time, when you have -8 divided by 2, I have -4. And -1 divided by 2, I have -1/2 x. Still not a match. So I set up my rectangle and triangle again for D. But this time, in front of Y, I have -1. That's important. On A, I had a positive 1, so it didn't change anything. But on D, when I finish putting these side by side, dividing by -1 will change my equation because that's -8 divided by 1, which turns it into positive 8, -2 divided by -1, which is positive 2. Okay, so my answer is D. Again, I'm going faster because it's a review, so please forgive me. On number 3, we're doing a linear correlation coefficient. This is where it's important to turn your diagnostic on. I covered this more on day 7's lesson, but to turn diagnostic on, you have to do these steps. And after you type your numbers into stat, do stat calc 4, your R, which is the only thing that's important for linear correlation coefficient, is -0.96 if we only go 2 decimal places. And that's what I want you to write on your quiz, just 2 decimal places. Do not use R squared because R squared is for quadratic. Okay, number 4. Number 4 is similar to number 2. We need an equation. That equation is going to give us -0.33 repeating for our slope. So we can either turn this into a fraction or leave it as a decimal. It's actually about the same either way. But all my answer choices have the fraction of -1/3, so maybe the fraction is a little bit better. So next I have to look at each answer choice and distribute the fraction in front to both of these numbers. So -1/3 times x just makes it -1/3 x. And then in my calculator, if I type in -1/3 times -6, I get +2. So the tricky thing here is, after you finish distributing, you have to still get y by itself. So if it helps to see your rectangle triangle in this problem, the only thing you need to do is get rid of this triangle, which is -2. And that will give you y by itself. So if I do +2 on both sides, then I add my 2's together, I now have -1/3 x plus 4, which is the same answer that I'm looking for, the same equation. Now, you probably won't have A as your answer on your quiz, so I went ahead and worked out the other 3 just so you can have these as notes in case you need to refer and get stuck on your quiz. But for time's sake, I'm moving forward, okay? Number 5. Number 5, we have to solve for y. So we're gonna, anytime we need to solve, that's where we use our rectangle triangle. And our triangle in this case is gonna be -2x. So we're gonna do +2x on both sides of the equation. We're going to have to put these side by side because they're not like terms. So negative 6 plus 2x side by side. And to get rid of the negative 5, you divide by negative 5 on both sides. Now on this one, if you type in negative 6 divided by negative 5, it comes out to be a pretty simple decimal. So I would take the decimal answer for this question. When I do 2x divided by negative 5, it comes out negative, so I need to make sure to put minus 0.4x. Now, if you decided to turn them into fractions, that is totally fine because both of these are the right answer. So either one of those, and this is not a multiple choice question on your quiz, so you would have to write the equation. On number 6, we have an inequality. So we're going to solve it like normal, but we have to remember when we flip. So solving like normal, I'm going to subtract 1x on both sides, then divide by negative 7. But because I'm dividing by negative 7, because there's a negative in my rectangle, I have to flip my symbol. Very important. That's the reason why you flip your symbol. We talked more about this on day 6. This was day 6 lesson. So this flips. Negative 7 divided by negative 7 is positive 1. Negative 1 divided by negative 7 comes out to be a decimal, but it's now positive. Turn that back into a fraction. Now the thing you need to remember next is put this into your y equals key. And also know that this symbol is less than, so we need to shade below our line for less than. If we shade below our line, then our answer is going to be A. And we know it's going to be A because that's what our graph looks like. Okay, moving on. Number 7. Number 7, they just said use the function of best fit. So we're going to have to get a function. Function's the same thing as an equation. And then we're going to have to figure out year 11. So the first thing is type all of these into stat. Then do stat calc 4. But we have a very long decimal. So we're going to round 2 decimal places for my slope. So my slope is going to be 0.09x. And my y-intercept is 2.84. Then, whenever we need to make a prediction, we're going to put this into our y equals key like this. Then we're going to go to the table, look for year 11, and we see 3.83. And this is talking about dollars. So my answer is $3.83. Okay, so I had to get an equation from stat, write down the equation, type it in a y equals, and go to my table. Those are the steps you're going to have to remember for this. And we did more of these type of questions on day 7. Number 8, this is what we did on day 5. And this is hopefully you don't view it as tough. It was tough for us on day 5. But what we have to do is type each one of these into y equals after we solve it, and then see if it has the point -3, -5. So if you distribute on A, you're going to have -2x, and then -2 times -3 is +6. Again, I got to get y by itself, so that means I'm going to add 5 to both sides of the equation. So that means I'm going to combine these like terms, and now I have +11. Okay, this is your equation. You type this into your y equals key. If you type it into your y equals key and then scroll to -3, you're going to see 17, not -3, -5. Okay? Another way to do this problem, by the way, if you're not using your y equals key, is your -3 is your x. So -2 times -3, that comes out to be +6. +6 plus 11 is 17. So that's another reason why A is not the answer. But a lot of people like to use their y equals key to see the answer. All right, so that means we need to keep going. So on B, distribute, we have -2x, and then that's going to be -6. Subtract 5 on both sides of the equation because we're trying to get y by itself, and you have -2x minus 11. So either type this into your y equals key or plug in -3 for x and see if we get -5 for our answer. So -2 times -3 is +6. +6 minus 11 does come out to be -5, and we see that in our y equals key as well from our table. So that means B is my answer. All right, number 9. Number 9, it doesn't tell us to solve this equation, but we need to solve this equation. So we're going to set up our rectangle triangle, always solve for y. And to get rid of the 1x, there's an understood plus in front of it. So we're going to subtract 1x on both sides of the equation, which means we now have 1y equals negative 3 minus 1x. Now, if you divide by 1, you still have negative 3 minus 1x. And if you pick your answer, after putting this into your y equals key, you see the table, and you should see the answer come out pretty easy to be B. All right, number 10. Again, I apologize for going fast. I'm doing this for the length of the video to keep it manageable. Okay, number 10. We don't have an equation solved for y. They did something tricky. They put a negative in front of y, which means there's really a negative 1 in front of y. So the only thing we have to do here, and no triangle in this problem, by the way, the only thing we have to do here is divide everything by negative 1. If we divide everything by negative 1, then our symbol flips to be greater than. And now we can type negative 5x plus 2 into our y equals key. We also need to remember that greater than you shade above and have a solid line. Talked more about this question on day 6. But after you graph it, you have this line. So now we just need to pick the one that is shaded above, which is A. Okay, number 11, this is what's new. So I'm going to try to go a little bit slower on this. This one's talking about total cost varies directly. So that word varies directly. And this right here, talking about which direct variation equation shows a relationship. That's the reason why I know I need to use y equals kx. The other thing is I got to read the question carefully and figure out what goes in for y and what goes in for x, because they didn't say it. So it says total cost of C. Total cost is always going to be y. So the total cost of 18 goes in for y, and then 10 goes in for x. So I can set up my equation to look like this. Now if I'm solving for k, which is the goal in this problem, that means you divide both sides by 10. So 18 divided by 10 is 1.8k. If I plug that back into my equation of y equals kx, then that means I'm going to have y equals 1.8x. But again, none of my answer choices we have two answer choices that have 1.8, but we got to know which one, where y is supposed to go. So y is supposed to go on the right side, and that's where they have n and a and c for b. But we know that total cost is C, which was my y. So that's the reason why B is the answer. Okay, number 12. Number 12, we could do the same thing with this first half of the question right here. This first half. But what I could do, so I could say y equals kx, and I could plug in 70 equals 14k, solve for k, and then plug in the second half of the problem. Or a much easier way to do this is, since I have three things in the problem, three numbers in the problem, we're trying to find the fourth number, we could set up a proportion, which makes this a little bit easier. So x and y are directly related. So I can write that as a fraction as long as I set it equal to putting x and y on the second part of the proportion. So if I have this proportion, usually people like proportions because all they have to do is cross multiply and divide. So 14 times 160 is 2,240, and then divide by 70 to be 32. Okay, here's what's going to happen next. I am going to show you the quiz questions. I'm going to pause for about 5 seconds on each question to give you time to either pause the video or take a screenshot. And then my next part of the video, I'm going to quickly cover the answers. And then that's it for today. Okay, so here's the first question. Here's the second question. Here's the third and fourth question. Fifth and sixth question. Seventh and eighth question. Ninth question. 10th question. And the last 2 questions of our quiz. Okay, so when I flip the screen or change the screen, I'm going to start explaining the answers pretty quickly. And again, I'm only covering it quickly for time's sake, but I want you to spend your time and work out these answers. And hopefully my quick solutions will help you see if you made a mistake. You'll see where you went wrong. But your goal here is to try to not miss more than 3 questions. You want to try to get at least 9 questions right. Okay, so here's number 1. First thing I'm going to do is type it in the stat. Then I'm going to write down my equation. My equation is negative 4x plus 4. If you notice, the most common mistake I saw people make was they said that C was the answer of negative 4x plus 4, or negative 4 plus 4x, which was really close to this answer. But negative 4 is with my x, and here is a positive 4. So they flip-flopped it, and people that were going a little bit too fast, they said C was the answer. But C is not the answer at all, because the signs aren't the same. D is the answer that I'm looking for. Okay, number 2. I'm going to type these in the stat. I'm only going to use temperature and number of skiers in L1, L2. And then I'm going to write down my equation. And that's it. You would have needed to write down the equation and needed around 2 decimal places. Number 3, to put in slope-intercept form, that means to solve for y. So I'm going to add 3x to both sides, divide by negative 5, and you should have the answer of negative 1.2 minus 0.6x, or write it as fractions. Number 4, I would need to solve for y by setting up my rectangle triangle, subtract 1x on both sides, then divide by negative 1. And since I'm dividing by negative 1, I need to make sure I flip the symbol, and then both of my numbers come out positive, because negative 1 divided by negative 1 is positive 1, negative 1x divided by negative 1 is positive 1. Then remember that this symbol, greater than, means shade above, which is what A has, or sorry, what 4 has. Yeah. All right, number 5, linear correlation coefficient. You just type in the stat calc 4, make sure your diagnostic is on. Depending how you round it, I would take negative 0.90 or negative 0.91. Number 6, type them in the stat. Your equation is going to come out to be negative 1.5x plus 7. If you distribute on A, you can make this fraction into negative 1.5 to make it a little bit easier on you. Negative 1.5 times x, and then negative 1.5 times negative 6 comes out to be positive 9. To get rid of the plus 2 on the left side, you're going to just subtract 2 on both sides, which means now you're going to have 9 minus 2 is positive 7, and this matches exactly what I was looking for. So A is the answer on number 6. Number 7. Number 7, I'm asked to get in linear regression function and then predict year 10. So if I type in the stat, I'm going to write down the equation of 45.42x plus 2,852. Put that into my y equals key, look at your table, and in your table, you're going to scroll down to 10 to see 3,306. Now, since they're talking about fairs, it makes sense to round the decimal point here. All right, number 8. We first needed to make sure we have a slope of negative 4. And if you notice, all of these answers have a slope of negative 4, so that's good. Next, we got to see which one passes through the point negative 5, negative 4. So the only way to do that is after you finish solving each one, and I have all of these worked out for you, so hopefully you did this as well, solve each one. Then you got to put this into your y equals key. Or you can plug in negative 5 for your x and then see if that's equal to negative 4. So negative 4 times negative 5, that comes out to be positive 20. Positive 20 plus 24, that's not negative 4. Then negative 4 times negative 5 is positive 20 again. Positive 20 minus 16, that's positive 4, not negative 4. Then positive 20 plus 16, that's 36. Then positive 20 minus 24, D is the one that comes out to be negative 4. Okay, all I did was plug in X to see what my Y is, to see if my Y is negative 4. Number 9, if I solve for Y, I'm going to subtract 1x on both sides. Subtracting 1x from both sides and then divide by negative 1 is going to give me negative 4 plus 1x. If you put this into your y equals key, then you can match up your equation. Number 10. Number 10, the only thing you need to do is divide by negative 1, but dividing by negative 1 will flip your sign and change your signs for each one of these terms. So now it's 2x plus 7. If you graph that, you have this as your equation, but you're going to want to remember what less than or equal to means, which means shade below with a solid line. The only one that's shaded below with a solid line that looks like this is D. All right, number 11. Number 11, you're doing a direct variation equation, so you're thinking y equals kx. You're plugging in 21.12 for your y and 12 in for your x. To solve for k, you divide both sides by 12, which is 1.76. Then you pick your equation that has 1.76, but it has your variables in the correct spot. So since total cost is your y, and that is your c, that is where you want c on the right-hand side of the equation, left-hand side of the equation, and your answer is A. On number 12, if you set up a proportion, which is the easiest way to do this problem, it's going to be 42 over 60 equals x over 30. Cross multiply and divide by 60, then your answer is A. Okay, I am sorry that this video was rushed through the questions, but I went a lot slower on days 5, 6, and 7. Make sure you catch each one of those lessons and catch my lessons from now on to help us prepare for STAAR. Thank you.